Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Just as always, we'll wait a couple minutes for everyone else to show up, grab their coffee, their lunch. But welcome to the Rally AMA. I'm going to put on some of our signature tunes into space. We've got an exciting one today with Andy here, so yeah, feel free to get your water, get your coffee, tea, settle in. Very international. Both coasts, South America, Europe. Awesome. We'll get started in just about 2-3 minutes. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Andy, come anytime. New York is the best, I have to say.
I had a friend recently who said, New York's great, but I don't think it's the best city in the world. And I was like, you're doing it all wrong.
Yeah. Awesome. We'll get started in just about 2 minutes. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Hello. Okay. We'll wind down on some of the music. I know it's everyone's favorite song. And we'll get started in a quick minute. Thanks, everyone who just joined. Put in your final intros in the chat if you haven't already. All righty. Why don't we get started then? Thank you so much, everyone, for joining for this month's Rally AMA with Andy. We'll start, as always, with some quick introductions. And this format, if you're familiar with our AMAs, this session is going to be a little bit different because Andy has actually created and prepared a presentation all about impact in research. So we're going to have a whole hour today with Andy where he's going to share some slides. And of course, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. I'll be able to answer questions throughout. So as always, please ask plenty of questions in the chat. We also appreciate all of those questions that you submitted beforehand. We got dozens of them, so we kind of streamlined some of them and are planning on addressing them throughout the presentation as well. But please, keep the Q&A shared. Brett, we will definitely be sharing the slides, the link to the recording here. So no need to furiously take notes this time. We got you covered. I will quickly start with an intro for those that I haven't met yet. My name is Oren. I am one of the co-founders and CEO here at Rally. And we are not just an AMA company. We are building a user research CRM, help lots of organizations streamline and automate participant management, recruitment, get access to their own real users for research. And I'm joined here by Lauren, who some of you may also be familiar.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, thought Oren was going to intro me, but I'm Lauren, run content marketing, so I'm the one you're getting all the emails from. I'll be doing the recap after. But yeah, really excited to be here again and also have Andy join us.
Wonderful. And very excited for our guest today. Andy, please feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can all see that now. I just want to say thank you to Oren and Lauren for inviting me to this AMA today. I've been a long-time viewer, first-time speaker and question answerer here today. So I'm really excited to be here and have really enjoyed the content that you've all put together. So thank you. As a way of introduction, my name is Andy Warr. I'm currently the Director of Portfolio Research and Insights at Dropbox, which includes customer and market research focused on the business decisions and strategies that the company makes, as well as our research operations team. And that includes things like customer connection, which is, in my opinion, a better name for research democratization. Excuse me. So that focuses on knowledge management and sharing, as well as other research programs. So when I was thinking about how to introduce myself today, I thought rather than list just the places that I worked, I thought it might be topical to talk about some of the impact myself and my teams have had over time. So when I was at Microsoft, a few of us saved more than 100 people hours per testing cycle, developing a service to automate the process of provisioning remote usability testing. And you might be thinking, that doesn't sound very impressive. Can't we all do that within user testing today? But we did this back in 2007 when tools like user testing didn't exist. And also software had to be installed by a CD-ROM, if any of you remember that. At Google, we launched and patented a tab and window manager for Chrome OS, which was empirically shown to improve the efficiency of window management over competitors. And we were actually fortunate enough to publish the results of that work at CHI 2016, which is a premium human-computer interaction conference. At Instagram, the research team led a study to understand the needs of small to medium businesses and their use of social media, resulting in Kevin Systrom, who was the co-founder and the CEO of Instagram at the time, saying, how many engineers do you need to build what today is business profiles and Instagram insights? And in 2017, there were over 25 million businesses on Instagram that use this feature, and over 200 million Instagram users who visited at least one business on Instagram each day. At Uber, a research study in China with the Uber Eats leadership team. So China, for those of you who do not know, is the world's largest food delivery market. So we really went there as an example of seeing an extreme market or extreme users. And that, a key insight from that about how apps there were combining high frequency, low margin businesses with low margin, high frequency businesses basically resulted in an initiative to redesign the Uber app, which increased annual recurring revenue by a projected 66 million, by increasing awareness, trial, and usage across Uber's services. So when you open up the Uber app today and you see rides and you see eats, that was the result of that research and that project. And then finally at Airtable, the team defined a strategy to focus the entire company on 2 use cases, marketing and product operations. And this was a cross-functional collaboration using a mix of qualitative and quantitative research. Now, while I would like to acknowledge that I have had a few successes throughout my career, I've also had my fair share of failures, but as this talk's focused on impact, we can talk about that another time or another day. I would also like to acknowledge that while I've worked hard and I'd like to say work smart to actually have these successes, there is also an element of luck with all of these. I don't want to discount that. And then finally, none of these successes would have been possible without the people that I got to work with on each of the projects. So let's talk about research impact. I'm going to start by saying that defining and measuring research impact has been like the search of the holy grail of our discipline. I think it's been going back for at least the last 2 decades that I've been in the industry, and probably much longer before I was even working. So as such, I also want to start with a caveat, and that is I don't pretend to have found this holy grail, so have the answer. I do have opinions, and my opinions are based on my experiences. And that also includes conversations that I've actually been having with industry leaders recently, discussing how they think about measuring research impact. And this includes leaders from companies such as Airbnb, Booking.com, Uber, to name a few. And I would also like to say that my opinion is going to evolve based on new experiences and also even the questions that you all asked today. Now, I also want to note that post my academic career, all of my work experience has been in-house and at big and emerging tech companies. So I just want to provide that context for how I think about impact. So it might differ for your industry or the particular field in which you're working. So what I want to do today is I want to tell you about my current thinking, as well as some strategies myself and my teams have adopted to maximize our impact. So let's first of all start thinking about how do you define research impact? And I want to say, first of all, that there's 3 ways that I think about impact. So the 3 Ps of impact. And this is really having an impact on the product, having impact on process, and having an impact on people. And for the presentation today, I'm mostly going to focus on having an impact on product. So what is being built by a company. Now, as I mentioned previously, there's been lots of work done to defining and measuring research impact, and it has been the holy grail of this industry. This framework that you can see up at the moment was from a post by Karen DeBollmeister, and there are some great measures here broken up by business outcomes, organizational outcomes, and even outcomes for UX research. The one thing I would say is that while there are some great measures here, there's also a lot. So it's not necessarily about that we want to be thinking about trying to achieve all of these ways of having impact within an organization, but rather we want to be thinking about at a specific time, based on your team, based on your organization, what is the metric that you want to be optimizing for and going after? And this is going to adapt throughout the organization's life cycle as it develops as a company, maybe from a startup through to a hyper growth company to something which is more of a mature industry. Excuse me. There are also some of these metrics that are disconnected from research. And there is often a lag between the research that is being conducted and a product launch, not to mention everything that happens in between. So some examples of this might be the number of MAUs, for example, monthly active users, or even the revenue which is generated by a product. The time that you have done a research study, which is informed design, which is implemented, which is then going through various product reviews and eventually hits the market with different types of messaging. There are a lot of factors that play into the success of that. And oftentimes what might have been a recommendation from research changes a lot throughout the way. And there's a lot of things that are outside of our control. There's also an interesting question about what incentives do the metric or the type of impact that you have actually has on yourself as an organization. For example, if you focus on a metric to increase the number of project changes or a metric for the number of studies that you might do, that could encourage your team to be focused on more quick, scrappy, evaluative research. So you really need to take a step back and think about what incentives am I driving with the metric that I'm trying to optimize. So with that, taking all of this into account in the different ways, I want to tell you how I currently think about research impact. And what I really think about is, what is research trying to influence? And I'm really going to be super literal here in terms of a definition. So research is the act of systematically investigating. This can be a diary study, an in-depth interview, or a survey, just to name a few examples. It's what we do. It's our bread and butter as researchers. And ultimately, we do this in order to have a strong effect on someone. This can be an executive, a designer, a PM, to influence a business decision, a design decision, or a product decision. A decision is basically a conclusion or resolution reached after consideration. And that consideration is the systematic investigation, i.e. research. So my thought is, or my premise, my thesis is that we conduct research to make decisions. Now, I should note that making a decision doesn't necessarily mean taking action. The decision could also be not to take action. For example, not to launch something. So really what I'm thinking about here in terms of impact is that the decision to be made is the atomic unit of research impact. So that could be like a single design decision, but it doesn't stop there, because a set of interrelated and powerful decisions that position the organization to win is a strategy. A strategy is nothing more than a series of choices. So if you think about a cohesive narrative of decisions to be made, and research is informing those decisions, that is strategic research. So that's how I think about the impact of research. So now I'll talk to you about how I think about ensuring that research can influence decision-making. There's basically 7 ways that I believe that we can have an impact here. I wrote an article at the beginning of this year which summarized 7 strategies for guaranteeing research impact. And this was shared as a pre-read for anyone who wanted to go ahead and look at that. So we'll make sure also that material is available to everyone afterwards. But really want to recap some of the lessons learned and points covered there. So the first point really is to ensure that our work is associated with an objective and key result. So which is also known as an OKR. So OKRs are a goal setting framework used by individuals, teams, organizations to measure goals and track their outcomes. And the real purpose around research aligning to an OKR is to ensure that what we are working on is relevant. Now, your organization might use a different goal setting framework, and that's fine. You could be using KPIs. It might even not use any of these. It might just have a product roadmap. It might have strategic initiatives. So think about what your organization does have and align your research explicitly to those goals that the company is setting. The second area is stating the desired impact. So when planning a research study, in addition to outlining the goals, the questions, the audience, the methods, the researcher needs to state the desired impact from the research. And more specifically, this is the business or product decisions that the research will inform, and what data needs to be collected in order to enable those decisions to be made. So per the definition of research impact, specifying the decisions to be made from the research before it's even being conducted is helping set you up for success in terms of saying, these are the decisions that we want to make. Do the research. You have an opinion in terms of what decision is. And then hopefully we have enough confidence instilled in order to make that decision. So it's almost like a self-realizing impact, or at least help set you up for success. Now, it can be really tempting to include generic statements such as, this research will inform the international product roadmap for the next fiscal year. Now, I would argue, and when I work with my teams, I push back and say, this is not specific enough. This is not a decision to be made. Now, I will note this can be an incredibly challenging process and will really test your skills as a researcher working with your cross-functional partners. But it's really key to get down to the nuts and bolts of like, what are we trying to decide here? Why are we doing this? And not just leaving it to chance to see what comes out of a study. So this is also a great exercise in terms of determining if research is even worth conducting. So for example, if a stakeholder is mostly confident in the decision to be made, and you're basically saying, okay, this is the decision that we want to make. This is the type of data that we want to collect to make that decision. If you know that type of data that you're going to be collecting, you can really think about what the extremes of that data might be to help inform those choices. And if you're having an honest conversation about would we make one choice over another, and that would not be the case, arguably we shouldn't be conducting that. And there might also be times where there could just be industry standards that are in place. That would also mean that we would just default to that within a decision to be made. And that doesn't necessarily mean we have to conduct new research. So this is like a template that a few of my teams have used, where you can see basically under the goal section there, we have the desired impact that we want to be defining with the team. Third is identifying a decision DRI, so directly responsible individual. A decision DRI is basically the person who is responsible for making that decision that you've defined. In most cases, this could be a designer or it could be a product manager, depending on the decision to be made. My one push here, and I find that I'm constantly doing this on a daily basis, is I'm always saying there can only be one. There has to be one person who is responsible for making this decision. As soon as you have more than one, then you get into sort of people wanting to pass the buck in terms of who needs to make the decision. So if you can help define that at the very beginning, you can have more success and hold people accountable to actually making that decision once they have the data to make it. Create an analysis plan. So I've talked a lot about defining the decisions, define the data, and before conducting research, a researcher should create an analysis plan. And an analysis plan is essentially a document that outlines how the data from the research will be analyzed and how it maps to the decision to be made, as well as ensuring that all the data that you're collecting is actually used. So this is actually a survey design template that a quantitative researcher, Jose, who know Wealth in Motion, actually created. And you can see about how it's like really outlining like the question, the response types, the type of analysis that we might do on that data, the different cuts that we might, and ultimately the decision that we're looking to make. Fifth is around making actionable recommendations. I think this varies a lot by company, but I always push my team, and every time for example, at Dropbox, we have a monthly customer snapshot, which is really a review of the research from the last month. And one thing that I'm always trying to push people on is to be very opinionated in terms of what the research is recommending. And one thing that we notice when we do that is it actually creates a bit more engagement with our cross-functional stakeholders. Cross-functional stakeholders are not interested merely in learning about what we've learned from our users. They want to know what action that they should be taking. There's often times that they're so busy that they don't have the time to digest all of the material that you have been like so deep in and don't really know how to determine it, how to like translate that into an action. So you can help move them part of the way there by coming up with a suggestion as a subject matter expert. So ideally, what I try to do with my teams is for every insight that we have, we also accompany it with an actionable recommendation. So here's an example of a report template that I've used at a few companies where we basically have our insight statement, we have our researcher interpretation, which also is supported by whatever data points we have, whether they be qualitative or quantitative. And then we pair that with a recommendation in terms of what we should be doing. 6 is to outline the what, the so what, and the now what. So I'm a big proponent that every research report should have a TLDR. A TLDR is essentially an executive summary, stands for too long, didn't read. And then the purpose of the TLDR is not for the reader to skip the research report, but rather it is to direct them to the relevant content within the report. And the TLDR really highlights the what the research found. So this is the insight. But one way that we can, and this is an example of a TLDR where we have the statements and basically the links to deep dive into the report. But then immediately after the TLDR, there should be a section that highlights the impact of the research and the decisions that were made. And this is the so what. And then in addition to highlighting that impact, the research needs to include the status of the next steps. And that is the now what. And I will say that it's not the researcher's responsibility to necessarily come up with the recommendations in isolation or the what are we going to do about this. Recommendations can be workshopped with your cross-functional stakeholders. I'm sure many of you do this. And the decision DRI is really the person who's ultimately responsible for telling you the status of the impact of these decisions to be made, because they're the one who's being held accountable. But the last thing I'll say here on this 7 ways to have impact is take action. So really nothing is someone else's problem. And some of the best researchers I've worked with are the ones who can put on the hat of a designer, an engineer, a product manager by creating a mock, building a prototype, or even sketching out a PRD when needed. And this behavior is not limited to just researchers. This applies to any function. And this is one of the reasons that you see less distinction between the competencies of leaders, because as they are not focused, because they're more focused on the success of their teams, they're not just focused on the success of their teams and their function, they're focused on the success of the company. So really, as you think about up-leveling your craft, think about how you push the boundaries of your craft to other functions, to other disciplines, and that will ultimately allow you to have an outsized impact within your company. Now, before I conclude, and very Apple Steve Jobs-esque, I wanted to mention that at the beginning of this presentation, I started by trying to define and measure the impact of research. Now, when meeting with a few research leaders recently, they said something that really made me think, and I wanted to share this with you. And they said to me, what is the impact of design? What is the impact of engineering? What is the impact of marketing? Why are we and others so focused on defining and measuring the impact of research? Because we're all working towards the same goal, building products for our customers. So I just want to put that as a pin, as a food for thought in terms of why are we being questioned this so much? And what does that actually mean for our discipline in the future? And with that, we'll actually get on to an AMA.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andy. That was really, really well done. Yeah, I'm sure people are taking lots of screenshots and jotting notes down. So appreciate you walking us through that. Let's get into the AMA. So appreciate a few of you already posting some questions here. I'm going to pose the first one from Demetrius on how have you tackled a situation where there were no OKRs or explicit/meaningful KPIs, assuming to tie the research to?
Yeah, so great question. I'm going to caveat this by saying that most of the companies that I've worked at, like as I mentioned, big emerging tech, they live and breathe the world of OKRs or different types of goal setting metrics. But outside of that goal setting framework, one of the things that I would frequently be doing is having a cadence of meeting with various leaders within the company to understand what their goals were for, let's say, an upcoming quarter. And then I would be documenting those goals, looking at potential synergy between various groups, and then coming up with a point of view in terms of where research could be focused. So that would be my my advice there, to try and make the intangible tangible, and even present that back to your stakeholder in terms of, this is what I'm hearing from you. Am I correct here?
Great. So it all starts with relationship building then, with the DRIs, finding out who they are and what they care about. Wonderful. So Carolyn has a question here. When would you skip or revisit one of these 7 steps that you had mentioned? Example, skip creating an analysis plan.
Ooh, that's a great question. I've definitely skipped creating an analysis plan before when timelines are tight, and we just needed to get that survey out in a week or something. I would say that none of these steps that I'm listing here are mandatory. They're all techniques that are going to help you optimize alignment and hopefully specifically get that alignment across cross-functional stakeholders. So you don't need to say start with number 7 in terms of taking action on everything that you do. Trying to get a decision DRI. It might not even work within your company in terms of that way. Maybe the company makes decisions in a different way through a different type of maybe product review. So definitely think about this as a framework that you can adapt to your company and think about what works. And I would recommend also not trying to do all 7 at once, but just start one at a time, maybe once a quarter, once a month, see what works for you.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Then another follow-up question here on the topic of DRI, and maybe you can just share a little bit more for this example here. What do you do when the person who was a DRI leaves the project or company during the research? And even maybe just flesh out some of your perspective on cultivating relationships with DRIs and best practices in that world.
Yeah. I guess like in terms of like if a DRI leaves the company, then it's about like hopefully that project, for example, like research is rarely conducted in isolation from other cross-functional partners. So if a company is building a product feature, for example, and someone leaves that project, someone else will be assigned to that project, or the project will be deprioritized, in which case there is a question of like whether it should even continue with the research that was set forth. So definitely hopefully you'll never be in a vacuum where if the project is continuing, like there is no longer a DRI there. And in terms of building those relationships, like mostly within the projects that I've worked, is my closest relationship has always been a product manager, and tending also to lean towards product managers that tend to lead areas as well within an organization. So not necessarily the product managers that are responsible for the execution of a given feature, but maybe the PM lead for a given area, because they tend to be the people who set the strategy and the objectives. So thinking about who actually aligns up with that goal setting that we mentioned previously.
Awesome. Cool. So there's another question here, which is in a similar vein, which I think happens in a lot of organizations, on how can you track research impact when company focus shift in the middle of research or before you're able to find meaningful findings or insights.
Yeah. So there's a few strategies for how we thought about doing this. One of the first strategies is that, well, first of all, I'll talk about like how we think about like tracking that impact. And then first of all, that always comes down to defining what those decisions are to be made at the beginning of the research. And then actually, like for example, when we have like at Airtable, for example, we used an Airtable base, so we would actually document the decisions that we had to be made. And when we had our impact, we would look at, okay, what was the decision that we actually made from this research? So that was like our tracking mechanisms. In terms of the shifting priorities, one of the things that we try to do, or one of the things that I try to do with my team is, both at Airtable and also at Dropbox, is not be focused on what we're building in the current quarter, but thinking about what's the thing that we want to be building the next quarter and subsequent quarters after. And the reason for doing that is when you're building products, things do change super quickly, and research is not necessarily the quickest practice to be executing on. It can take time, it can take rigor. Sorry, my dog wants to leave the room. Like, I've had enough of the questions. So we try to be thinking about, okay, if we're thinking about investing, let's say we're in Q4 at the moment, in Q1, something next year, let's be conducting research to set us up for success when it comes to teams executing on that. So really trying to think more ahead and get ahead of the curve, as opposed to being within the churn that is product development.
Love it. Love it. So rising above, looking into the future, and aligning yourself strategically that way. Cool. Another question here from Brian. He loves number 7 and the general high agency approach to research. Andy, do you have any advice for being that kind of researcher and avoiding stepping on other functional leaders' toes?
So I guess like one of the, I've like going back to a saying that we had at Google, ask for forgiveness, not permission. So if you see an opportunity and someone's is not acting on it, and you believe that you can act, go do something, and then see what happens. And then if you do get people who are like very territorial, that's a lesson learned from that. I would say that another thing that you could do in a strategy here, and something that I believe in, is just with customer research and user research, you iterate along. So don't wait to pull out a fully fleshed PRD, for example. That includes everything that you want to, like a fully spec product brief, but start building out over time, and then start socializing it with people and start building that momentum from the ground up. And then you'll actually start to get some direction and some understanding of, like, okay, like, one, you get people's input, but then you're also showing that you're taking initiative. And it's really bringing people along in the journey with you. Very similar to how we would try to bring people along when designing a research study.
Wonderful. Great advice. Nikki here is asking, where would you recommend starting along this path for a UX research team of one?
You're so lucky to be a research team of one. So every team that I've built up until my most current role, I've always been the first researcher and built teams around me. And actually at Dropbox, it's the first company that I've gone into leading an existing team, a quite established company as well, mature company that has existing practices. And that's definitely a humbling lesson for me in terms of curiosity and learning. And it's been a great experience so far to do that. But when you're a team of one, you can create processes and basically think about like inventing them from new and what works best for your organization. So just in that respect, I think it's a good opportunity to think about where are you most passionate about actually making an impact in terms of the process of research, socializing that with your leaders to get their thoughts and how that maps to the goals of the organization and their values and where they think they are at any time. And then just piloting and learning and iterating from there. And then hopefully as you start to execute on research, you start to put processes in place to encourage customer-centric, data-driven decision-making. You'll get buy-in for increasing the size and the scope of the team that's executing research.
Wonderful. Very sage advice. Another question here. We have a lot more to get through, so appreciate everyone for asking your questions and patiently waiting. So Coyle is asking, what do we do when you find yourself in the crossroads of multiple OKRs? So competing priorities, potentially.
Yeah, so the first thing, so I'll tell you how we went about doing this at, I've recently been through this exercise at Dropbox. We've just come into the end of our Q4 planning. And a few weeks ago, I had to finalize my team's OKRs. And my team's OKRs were based on a number of company narratives which were coming out. And from those narratives, Misi wants to rejoin. From those narratives,
Misa's always welcome.
From those narratives, there were a number of key initiatives that the company wanted to invest in. So one of the exercises that I went through was trying to think about, okay, I'm looking across the go-to-market team, various product teams that exist at Dropbox. Where am I seeing actually some of the synergies between these? So when I was putting my OKR in place, for example, I had a number of key initiatives that this could map to or inform. Now, I will say that sometimes it can be tempting to put every initiative that you see there. And I believe that that's a mistake, because I call this, I got this feedback when I was a PhD student and I was submitting a paper. I thought that if I included if I was trying to prove a point and I included all of the references that I knew to support that point, that I would be like, here's like my evidence. And I remember a reviewer one time saying to me, stop shotgun referencing. So, and to me, it's like, you really can't actually, don't try to take all the wood and put it on the fire. Think about a few select pieces that you want to have here. Really maintain your focus. So one, try not to like dilute the impact of your research and try to be something to everyone. Make meaningful investments. So one thing that I try to do is I don't try to like think about, let's say, every key initiative that a research study can inform within a given area. But like, what's one from a product team? Is there anything that relates to the marketing team here? Do they ladder up? So I'm trying to think about cross-functional influence and connections there, because that really allows to increase the scope of the impact that we might have. But then when it comes to competing priorities, research can only do, like, we tend to be a pretty small function within companies. So we can't do everything. So then there really has to be an honest conversation with folks around, well, do we want to invest in this or that? So when my teams do roadmap planning, one of the things that we do is like they talk to their cross-functional teams about what investments we might make within a given quarter. We come up with a list of prioritizations in terms of like the impact that we're going to make. And then the team actually go ahead and they draw like a line in the sand. And that line in the sand essentially, or within the doc, is this is what we have the capacity to actually execute against. And if the leaders or the cross-functional partners that a researcher will work with cannot come to a conclusion on that, that basically gets bumped to a really the next level of management within the organization. So one of the things that I've done is have a review, for example, with our functional leaders. So if there are any flags on, in your opinion, should we be working on this or that, then we can actually make a determination with those senior leaders.
It's fantastic. Lots great advice navigating both complementary priorities and goals, and then competing ones. So appreciate that, Andy. Next question here, more tactical one from Wes. When you mentioned customer snapshot, what is your method of sharing this out? Is it monthly meeting, something you share at async?
Yeah, so I'll try and like mix a few company experiences here. I'll try to actually stay concrete with Dropbox at the moment. So with Dropbox, like when a researcher has finished a study, one, they'll be sharing out with their product team who they've been working closely with. But then we'll also be sharing out in a Slack channel that we call Company Announce, that really is anyone who's interested in following on with research. And we have quite a few hundreds of people within that channel. At Airtable, we actually opted everyone into the company to that channel because we wanted to be a very customer-centric, customer-first company. So if we believed in building product with insights first, then people need to be exposed to those insights. We would also have research readouts at Airtable. And this is something that we're looking to reintroduce at Dropbox. There's been a slight pause on this at the moment, but want to be looking at this again. And then we have a monthly newsletter, which is sent out across various parts of the company. And that is the snapshot, which is not only like, here are the top 3 things that you must know from research this quarter, but also all the other research that might have been conducted that given month, as well as from other partners within the organization. So that could include, for example, a CSET report from our customer experience team, or maybe a piece of research that has come from our marketing org. So really trying to push the boundaries and be like a representation of customer insights.
Wonderful. We've got just about 10 minutes left. So We'll try to get through as many more of the questions as we can. But here, Carolyn is asking a question on how you work with other insights disciplines, whether it be market research, business analysis, data science, CX, etc., and how can you tie this back to research impact?
Yeah, so okay, so first of all, like when I was at Airtable, one of the things that I did there, and I had a lot of alignment from our senior leadership team, was we wanted our research function really to be a center of excellence for customer research. So we tried to, like, if there was a way of like gathering insights and doing research, we tried for it to be on my team. That's not to say that other teams weren't insight generating functions or customer facing. Like, we still had customer success managers. We still had like our sales associates who were reaching out to customers. So one of the things that the research team used to do there is they would used to be reaching out to those CSMs, for example, to actually understand everything that they understood about a problem space and synthesize that as a sort of like secondary research meta-analysis to inform actually, one, if we needed to include net new research, and then two, also be a way of triangulating data. Then there was also a lot of like projects that I worked on in terms of that involved cross-functional collaboration. So very purposeful from the outside and from the outset in terms of there were people who were contributing different types of insights to inform a decision. So the example of informing Airtable's strategy to focus on the use cases of product and marketing. Research was doing a lot of in-depth interviews with customers within those areas, which was identified primarily by an analysis of our customer success team of all of the use cases that we were seeing from companies. So we was really like documenting that. And then our data science team were looking across those use cases and doing an analysis of engagement, growth, usage of the product, etc. And this altogether really helped with a prioritization and understanding of the investments that we wanted to be make. At Dropbox, one of the things that they have there is they have an Insights Council. And the Insights Council is basically a representative from different insight generating functions. So we have someone from our CX team. They have myself and a program manager from our research insights function. We have someone from data science who is on there. Unfortunately, like data science is like very focused on a lot of our reporting reviews, so we haven't had the opportunity to work with them so closely recently. But then we also have other functions in terms of like our marketing team who are also represented there. And I think this is still an area of learning in terms of like how we effectively work together. But one of the things that we're trying to do is create more awareness of what we're working on, or what we believe we might be working on within a given quarter, a given fiscal year, to identify those opportunities for collaboration, where there are synergies between our projects, but then also taking a step back and looking across that portfolio and thinking about where are the gaps, and should we be doing anything, or do we even have the bandwidth to do anything there?
Wonderful. One more question here. Story time. People have stories. Maybe Catherine's asking for an example of a way that you've pushed the boundaries of your craft to other disciplines and functions.
Example of how I've pushed the boundaries of the craft to disciplines and functions. I would say maybe like one. I'll go to the Uber example. So I talked about this at the beginning in terms of the impact that it had, but it was really Uber Eats at the time, one of the America's largest food delivery platform, and also the world's excuse me, the world's largest food delivery platform. But then China is actually, in terms of the volume of food deliveries they're doing, they're at an extreme market. And there was a lot of questions from our leadership team about how do they operate at that scale. And just to put this in context, by the way, the food delivery apps in China, and this is back in 2018, were doing 15 times the number of food deliveries in China that Uber Eats was doing globally in a day. So like the scale of this is absolutely massive. So we took our leadership team to China for a research immersion, and we had them basically partnering, shadowing interviews with what we'll call eaters. So these are the people who order food delivery through these food delivery apps. We would do follow-alongs with couriers. We would actually go to restaurants and understand how they were using technology and how they would receive these orders. And we also met with representatives from these food delivery apps, such as Meituan and Ele.me, as well as global restaurant partners that were present in China. So Starbucks, McDonald's, for example. And these people being part of this research and shadowing it, as well as being involved in the workshops and the lessons learned, and then taking those materials to promote that with the rest of the Uber executive leadership, was really a way of like pushing our craft of research with our senior leadership team, to the point where when it came to Uber wanting to make an investment in grocery delivery, there was an executive, the executive team were going out to Brazil, which was one of the markets where they wanted to be making an investment in grocery delivery. And our head of product said, Andy, can we do what we did in China in Brazil? And that China trip, it took about, I don't know, like anywhere from 3 to 5 months to actually plan. And he told me this 3 weeks before the trip happened, but we made it happen. We scrambled and we put something together where our head of the business unit actually went to someone's home and then understood about how they got food delivery. And the thing that I think was really powerful about the craft there, and when the team knew that we were having an impact, was at the next all hands when he talked about that experience, about sitting in someone's home and talking about the lessons that they took away. So these are just like things about how can we expand our craft, not just across our functions, but also up the organization. And one of my goals actually at Dropbox, one of my KRs, is to ensure that everyone on our S team, which is our executive team, has a customer interaction at least once a quarter.
Love that. Love that. Do you think we have time for one more question?
Let's do it.
All right. So this is a question from Joe. Have you been in a situation in which your pace of generating research, insights, and recommendations has outpaced your stakeholders' bandwidth to act upon them? What can you do to continue to deliver value to your organization in this situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, I've been in that situation. And that situation actually was most recently at Airtable. And unfortunately, Airtable made a big cut in its user research team. But before those layoffs happened, our CPO said to me, we have enough foundational insights that have defined our product roadmap for the next 12 to 18 months. Now we need to execute. And there are times in organizations where organizations are going to value different things. So my team at the time was very set up for like thinking about looking forward in terms of that strategic research and informing what the product should be building. And there was a time where the company knew and felt confident in exactly what it needed to be building. So building out for those marketing and product use cases, focusing on large enterprises. And it was really about like we need to just do this now. And we don't need to be thinking so much about what we're building next. And what happened after those layoffs is that the team went to focusing a lot more on the working, having a closer relationship with product, with what was being built at that time. So I think all of this is to say that organizations, they're going to have different needs of research at different parts of the organization, at different times of the company lifecycle. And as a leader of that organization, like, you really need to be thinking about, what does my company value at this given time, and how am I positioning my team to best deliver that value? And it also requires that you and your team can be agile and flexible to actually adapt to what the company needs at any given time.
Beautiful. That was a great place to end. Apologize for anyone that we didn't get to their questions, because there were just so many of you. But Andy, thank you so much for this. Yeah, we could have easily gone for another hour. You are an endless well of insights and wisdom. So thank you endlessly for the time.
Thanks for having me here, and thanks everyone for joining. I really appreciate it, and the questions.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Again, you'll get a recap in your inbox next week, and feel free to connect with Andy on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'll love to get your questions separately. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.